Remodeler and custom home building aficionados, you've probably been wondering, how the heck am I going to hire a project manager that's actually competent enough to manage all the projects that I have in the field so that I can go sit on a beach in Hawaii and enjoy the life that I once hoped for when I started this company? Then today's video is going to get you one step closer to that. In fact, today's video is going to be such a comprehensive training that I feel like you will be able to, one, identify if you even need to hire somebody, two, how to hire that person, and three, how to keep that person performing and satisfied within your construction company. If you don't know who I am Lev Parsegian. I'm the founder of Cosmosify. We build systems for remodelers and custom home builders so that they can have a more smooth and profitable business. But enough about me, let's get into the training. All right, so if you are hiring a project manager and you want to do it the way that we do it with all of our remodelers and custom home builders, then I'm going to walk you through this process. The first thing that I will say before we get into this is that the philosophy that I have when it comes to recruiting in general, but more so recruiting for the residential construction industry, and we're talking about a project management role, it's probably going to be a little bit different than one, how you've ever thought about it, and two, anything that's really out there, I feel. And the reason why we do it this way is because my background comes from the technology world, right? So I worked for companies like T-Mobile, House.com, Better.com, and Workday. And working at massive multi-billion-dollar organizations like this gave me a lot of context as to how some of the biggest players in different industries hire and how we can take those principles and apply them to the residential construction industry, specifically for remodelers and custom home builders. So without any further ado, let's get into it. I want to keep things pretty simple, and we'll just kind of show you this flow chart. But we're going to start off with the very first thing. Before hiring anybody, I always tell my guys that we need to first identify the constraint of the business. So if you have ever been in a position where you want to hire somebody, and the reason why you're hiring them is because of the fact that you feel like it's the right thing for you to do given where you're at, and you're just so stretched thin, and you don't have a lot of time on your hands. Well, I always like to challenge that belief with this. And it's just because you can hire someone doesn't necessarily mean that you should. Here's what I mean by that. If we identify that your time is being, I would say 80%, 70 to 80% spent on managing your crews in the field, then maybe, just maybe, we should consider bringing somebody on, but maybe we can look at the rest of your week and how it is that we can optimize the rest of the week for efficiency. And it's not because of the fact that I'm opposed to hiring people, period. It's because of the fact that usually we make this decision way too early in our businesses. Like a lot of my guys, like they have stretched to over 3 million, 4 million a year without a project manager. It's just because of the fact that they've been able to effectively manage their time. Now, every business is a little bit different, and so I recognize that, but you need to identify for yourself what the actual constraint is. If the constraint is fulfillment and you're just spending all of your time in the field, so it doesn't allow you the opportunity to focus on higher value activities, we call them HVAs, higher value activities, which would be marketing or selling, then I would probably agree with you that, like, hey, if you have ambitious goals, maybe, just maybe, we need to bring in a project manager. But identify the constraint first. If it is not the constraint of the business, then don't hire. But if it is, then we can move on to the actual process. And so that brings me to the job description. Okay. Prior to actually looking for a project manager, I know we jump the gun oftentimes and we want to go straight to, talking to people and interviewing and then eventually extending an invitation to work for you. But I would actually like to focus on the front end as much as I possibly can on defining who specifically that I need. Because you may think that you need a project manager, but maybe you need a site super. Or you may think you need a site super and you need a foreman, or you think you need, and you guys get the point. I'm not going to keep harping on this, but defining who and getting crystal clear on the 4 R's is going to be key for you guys. And so you may be asking yourself, what the heck are the 4 R's, right? And so the 4 R's that every job description, I believe, needs to have is the role description, right? Like we're talking about like the role itself, the responsibilities, the results, and the requirements. And so let me explain what these 4 R's are and what they mean. So the role is pretty straightforward. We're giving a description of what the tasks required within the role look like, right? And what the role looks like at large. And you can kind of bring examples into some of these points. Like, for example, if you're a project manager, your role will require you to spend time in the field with the crews, scheduling, and so on and so forth. I'm not going to get into details, but that's just the role, right? Responsibilities actually goes into the tangibles of what is that project manager going to be held accountable for at the end of the day, right? What are we expecting of them in terms of their responsibilities, of what workload they're going to keep on their plate. The next part of this is results. So I'm really big on outcome focuses when it comes to hiring teams. And so if a team member comes on and it's a project manager and they're not clear on what success looks like, the likelihood that they're actually going to stick with you and not, want to work for a competitor or another company is very high. And we obviously don't want to lose talent just because of the fact that we have not defined what success actually looks like for them. And the thing is too, I want to focus on results a little bit more right now, just because of the fact that in a job description, you may think to yourself like, well, can I just figure that out once we get there? Sure, you can. But the thing is once you get there, people don't do it. Like contractors, in my experience, they say like, okay, I'll get around to it. And then they're so focused on the project manager actually fulfilling all the duties in the field. And then the result that they're looking for is kind of like a moving goalpost. And so the PM ends up disgruntled because they're just like, dude, what the heck? Like I was hired and I was expecting this, and that. And I think that I'm doing really well in my mind. But the GC is kind of disgruntled because they're like, oh, they're not doing this, they're not doing this, they're not doing this. Well, it's because of the fact that the results or the outcome has not been clearly defined. And whose responsibility is that? You. If you are the general contractor, you're the owner of this remodeling firm or this custom home building firm, you are the person who sets that standard. And so it's really important to make it clear what the result is that you're expecting. And then the requirements. What are the requirements, right? Like let's talk this through a little bit. If somebody has never managed a job site before, maybe they want to break into project management with your company, they either have to have a substantial amount of experience that shows us they have the characteristics, they have the traits, they have the competencies, the skills necessary in order to do the job at hand, or we can just put that aside altogether and just say, hey, this person needs to have a minimum of 7 years of experience as a project manager, and so on and so forth. Now, this is going to be a little bit different across the board. I mean, you need to get clear on what this looks like for you, and again, that just kind of boils down to the responsibilities. Because if the responsibilities are very clearly stated, and you don't necessarily need somebody who's better than you at managing a job site, well, then maybe the requirements are going to reflect that. But the whole point is that just make sure you clearly define what your requirements are. In my general experience, 5 to 7 years is a solid mark when it comes to hiring a project manager. And I like to see that they have experience specifically in residential remodels, whether it be retail remodels, just because of the complexity that can come with those sometimes, and or some light commercial work, tenant improvements and things like that. And so this is the job description. That's like the first part of it. The next part of it is, if you have not defined your core values for your company, guys, this is the time to do it. Why? Because in the job description, you need to call out the type of person, personality-wise, culture fit-wise, that you want working for you. And so if you do not, the famous quote is, if you stand for everything, you stand for nothing, right? And so I'm a big believer in that quote, because oftentimes general contractors, they're just kind of like, well, if they're good, then they're going to be good, and we're going to be able to see that really quickly. That is not any sort of way of hiring somebody. In fact, I hear that and I'm like, what does that even mean? If I bought a residential construction business and a contractor told me, well, I just kind of have a gut feeling like with the guys that I hire, and we just have like really great relationships with each other, that's awesome, man. But coming in as an investor, like, I have no idea how I would go about finding somebody like that. Now, maybe a green investor in the residential construction space would not be looking to buy a company like that. But nonetheless, you want to be able to create your company in a way where anybody, I mean, literally anybody, could come in if they have enough competency, enough will to follow your process from start to finish and be able to replicate the same results. And if you're not able to do that, well, frankly speaking, then you don't really have a business. You just have a high paying job. And in a lot of contractors' cases, a low paying job. But I digress. Okay, so what are core values? I'm not going to get too much into this, but basically, and I'll give you the example of what like core values we have at our organization here at Cosmosify. But our core values are integrity over profit, ruthless communication, and serious fun. Okay, these are like the 3 core values that I live and die by, and that my team, my clients, our partner contractors, we all align and adhere to these values. Why is it so important to have those? Because you guys have all had nightmare customers before, nightmare homeowners who just have like the craziest expectations, and they don't pay you out your final draw when it's due. They dick you around throughout the project, and it's just a terrible experience. Now, the same thing applies with employees. The same way that you can have nightmare customers, you can also have nightmare employees. And if you've been in the game for long enough, you've probably experienced that to some degree already. But what if I told you that you could prevent that on the front end by defining what you stand for and what is an absolute non-negotiable in terms of values? Right? And so just using the integrity over profit example, ruthless communication, and then serious fun example, this is the way that I define it. Integrity over profit, we actively say no to opportunities where we feel like we're not going to be able to serve 110% net benefit to the person that we're working with, right? Whether that's an employee, whether that's an independent contractor, or whether that's a client that we work with, or a partner contractor that comes on board to our growth partnership. Like, I will say no. I've said no to a lot of contractors just because there's something that just does not align in me personally, where I feel like, you know what, I do not feel like we're going to be able to serve them to the best of my ability, to the best of our ability. And I have literally referred them to other resources just so that they can get the value that they need and maybe resort to us at a later time. But that's something that's really important to me. Another example is serious fun. If I do not enjoy the people that I'm working with, right? And I don't enjoy, our partner contractors or, clients, whatever the case is, like the relationship is probably going to go south really quickly. And so if I get the vibe that like they're not going to be that fun, or they take themselves too seriously, then I will just say, hey, Mr. Employee, Miss Employee, or Mr. or Mrs. Client, this isn't going to work out. And this is the importance, guys, of having clearly defined core values. Okay, now the last thing, talking about the job description. David Ogilvy has famously said this, and it's when you have written your headline, you have spent 80 cents out of your dollar, right? And David Ogilvy, one of the godfathers of advertising, he said this as it relates to obviously commercial advertising, but this actually applies to job descriptions too, because a job, we've also heard it, right, guys? It's job description, but it's also a job ad. A job posting is the same thing as an advertisement, right? You're advertising your company, and instead of attracting customers as leads, you're attracting candidates as leads. Okay. And so you want to have a really strong headline that says something like attention, hyper ambitious, integrity driven project managers looking for a career with stability and growth. Or, if you are all of those things, then this is for you, right? Make it just super clear, and try not to make it like the average type of job description, just because most average job descriptions, they get ignored. And why wouldn't they? They're average. And so if you don't want to be average, focus on the headline, the very top of your job description. All right, the next step here is lead generation. Now, this is actual candidate generation, okay? We want to be able to attract candidates. Well, how will we do this? In truth, there's really 2 ways of going about it, and that's inbound versus outbound, okay? Now, one thing to understand when it comes to outbound is that it requires time, meaning that you are going to the candidate. You are finding the candidate yourself. And Indeed has some features where you can actually find the ideal person, or type in the ideal characteristics, traits, and the type of role that you're looking for. And I think they have like some sort of a paid subscription where you can reach out to people directly, which, don't get me wrong, like I'm all about that. But I would just say if you go the outbound route, you're going to have to adjust your expectations because it's going to, one, take time for you to get people to respond to you. And there's specific ways that you can reach out to them so you can increase the likelihood that they'll respond. But it's going to take a lot of time. I'm not going to sit here and preach that outbound is going to be the right answer for everybody. But the more specialized the person is that you're hiring, the more that you're actually going to want to pursue outbound versus inbound. Now, inbound is pretty simple, where you have a job description, like a website like Indeed, okay? And on Indeed, geez, this is terrible. On Indeed, you can post a job, and the job has, your headline and the 4 Rs and so on and so forth, right? And then what happens is they go into Indeed, candidates like project managers that are looking for a job, and they start applying for a role at your company or applying for roles at other companies. Okay. It's pretty simple, but again, based on this, the job description, which I can't stress enough, if you do a pretty good job at this, even in some of the most rural markets, you should be able to attract good talent. Now, a big part of the inbound piece as well is the fact that there are people who are searching actively in the job market who are probably applying for your role. Okay. And that may not necessarily always be the best talent. Also, there are certain seasons of the year when talent is more likely to actually leave their current employer. In the recruiting world, there's something called the September surge, and I've actually found this to be very true for a lot of roles in construction. But seasonality does have a huge factor on this. A big part of this, guys, is that if you're not getting enough applications, you're not generating enough leads or enough candidates, then you need to do more of what you're currently doing. So go back and refine the job description and stuff like that. And keep reposting new ads, test new ads like every, I would say, 7 days, and see what is changing about the quality of the candidates just based on what you're calling out or the title of the role. It could be construction project manager, it could be senior project manager, it could be project manager, right? Or residential remodel project manager. The whole point is, and obviously these are not all, these are the ones that we use, but the point is that you want to pick something that is going to stick with your market. I can't say exactly what that would be for you because it really just takes testing, guys. After this step, guys, you're gonna want to get into candidate reviews. And this is the fun part because now you're actually getting some candidates. Some people are maybe even messaging you personally and saying, "Oh, Lev, we can't wait to work for your company. We can't wait to interview with you," and so on and so forth. To those people, you just got to say, "Hold your horses, buddy." Because I'm not looking to hire anyone just yet. I need to review. And so the purpose of candidate reviews or pre-qualification is you got to sit and you need to review the resumes. Now, here are some things that I look for when reviewing resumes, guys. This is pretty straightforward, but I'm just going to map it out. Spelling. This is really big, but I have reviewed probably over 1,000 resumes at this point in my career. And in reviewing this many resumes, you'll be so surprised that people cannot do basic things. And one of those things is spelling. And I know you're thinking, okay, this is a project manager. I'm hiring a project manager. I don't need somebody who has a degree in, grammar, literature, or writing or whatever, which is fair and fine, right? But you do want this person to eventually communicate with a homeowner or a subcontractor. If my project manager can't, that is going to be a very expensive reflection of my brand. I'm going to be paying this person anywhere between $85,000 to $115,000 a year, depending on the market that you're in. And if they cannot do something as basic as spell and write in complete sentences and use proper grammar, then I am concerned about how my brand is going to be perceived in the marketplace. So yeah, spelling, that's one of them. The second thing is a resume. Now, look, with a resume, some of these platforms have like built-in resumes that they like make for you, like LinkedIn and Indeed and whatnot. That's fine. You can use those, but I just want to see completeness within the resume, whether it was generated by the platform and they didn't like make like a separate PDF. I don't really care about that. I just want to see that it's clear who they are. They have contact information. I know where it is that they're based out of. I can see their most recent experience, details about the outcomes of their time with all their employers. And then also, just the basic thing is how all the stuff on the resume actually applies to the role. Now, I have seen resumes that are not the most impressive in the world, and that is what takes me to not getting too stuck on this and moving to the next piece, which is the screening call. Now, guys, this is the thing with a lot of contractors. A lot of contractors are like, "Oh, you know what? Like I want to be picky after, we've had discussions about identifying the constraint, the job description, and we generated some people, we reviewed some candidates. Now all of a sudden, this is where a lot of contractors draw the line. And they're like, "You know what? We've put in so much work into this. We're going to be picky. And let's not screen everyone." And it's like, what do you mean let's not screen everyone? We need to screen as many people as possible, especially if you have never hired for somebody this clearly intentioned ever or in the past. Okay, screen as many people as possible. And this is the caveat that I'm going to say here, guys. If you are screening somebody, okay, I want you guys to, wait for it, record the conversation, okay, with consent of the candidate. Okay? And if this is legal in your jurisdiction, which in most places it is, so long as, you say that this is going to be recorded quality purposes or training purposes, right? You guys are also building an internal intellectual property library for your business, right? Where you have a bunch of call recordings of past PMs that you guys have screened, and you can tell very clear as day after you start screening people whether they're going to be good based on some of the non-tangible factors and some of the tangible factors. Non-tangibles could just be, you can barely hear them, or their service is cutting in and out, or whatever the case is. And tangible factors would be, they're not very well spoken, and they can't really complete their sentences, or they just kind of ramble on and things like that. When you record the conversation, you can actually truly rate the quality of the candidate anywhere on a score from 1 to 5. This is like so important. Like I almost feel like the screening matters more than any other part of the interview process, just because this is where so many mistakes are made that I personally see with a lot of general contractors, a lot of remodelers especially. And so screen the heck out of these people. The questions that you want to be asking is, I always like to start off by asking the basic one, which is, okay, you have the opportunity to apply to so many roles. Okay, why specifically did you choose to apply to this one at, Lev's Construction? And then you let them say whatever it is that they say. They say, yeah, well, I was applying and blah, 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 and this and that. Okay, cool, great. And what specifically stuck out to you in the job description, right? And a lot of times we don't even think to ask that question because we don't put any work into the job description. But if you put in work into the job description, right, you also want to test the quality of the candidate to see if they're even reading the job description and why it aligns with them in the first place. Now, I'm not asking them to say like, oh, this one specific requirement, just really spoke to me, or I'm so good at delivering projects before the scheduled deadline, and so on and so forth. Like you don't need them to again, give you a whole entire performance. You just need to see enough that they have actually taken the time to go through everything in the description, and if they're sincere about their intentions. Okay, so record the conversation, keep the conversation, and then after you have screened, I would say anywhere between, again, depends on the candidate pool, but let's just say 6 to 10 people on average. Then you say, okay, you know what? Screen 6 to 10. Let's start moving people forward into the next part of the process. And so this is where you share with them, okay, there's going to be a behavioral interview. And on this interview, you are just basically going to discuss at a high level what the role is, but also you want to understand how they have behaved in past organizations, right? Like, bring up certain scenarios. Can you tell me about a time when, you were met with a deadline? And I have a whole entire list of questions that we ask project managers. But one of those questions could be, can you tell me about a time where you had to work with somebody on a job site that you didn't necessarily agree with, and what was the outcome of it, right? And the way that you want them answering the question, this is really key, what we like to call the PAR format. And I don't even think that I like to call it this. I think it's just called that. But problem, action, result. Okay. So you explain to them at the very beginning, like, look, guys, all I want to know, like, when I ask you these questions is what was the problem, right? What was the problem you were faced with? What was the action that you took? And what was the result that came from it? Okay. Why do we tell everybody that we're interviewing to answer our questions in this way? Well, because we're also testing their ability to adhere to instructions. And so this is their first assignment, is not just showing up to the call on time and professional and blah, 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 and all this stuff. Also, I want to say this too, guys, this is a Zoom call. We've interviewed project managers before where, you know, they have really long days, and sometimes they do show up on Zoom, and it's, you know, over their phone. It's not a deal breaker for me, but like if their connection is cutting out like every 2.5 seconds, that is a deal breaker for me, because it's like, dude, you knew that we were going to have it at this time. You could have asked for us to do this at a different time. You didn't. So you're not respecting your own time, and you're not respecting our time, right? But I digress. The problem, action, result format is great because you're actually giving an assignment to this person and saying, hey, this is how we are expecting you to answer these questions. If they do this, then great. That means they are adhering to the instructions that you just gave them. And the likelihood that they're going to adhere to your instructions later on, if they do get the job, is going to be a way higher likelihood if they actually do these things. Okay, so yes, ask your behavioral questions. Tell me about a time when, tell me about yourself, and blah, 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 blah. And then considering all things go well, this is where actually a lot of general contractors stop, and they don't do anything else past this point. And they're like, hey, here's the job. Welcome, new hire, right? And we don't want to do that. We have a couple more steps in our process. And if you're thinking, dude, this is like so many steps, like what, like I run a construction business, I don't need to do all of this. You're right. You don't need to do all this. But you can't also complain that the people that are working for you have no idea what they're doing, and they're all incompetent, and the market sucks, and there's no talent out there, if you continue doing things the way that you're doing them. Right. And I only know this to work because I have literally done this time and time and time again with all of our contractors. If I were pulling this out of my ass, then I would say, you know what, maybe don't listen to me. But you know what, even if you don't listen to me, that's okay too. Okay, so skills assessment. So moving on from behavioral interview to the skills assessment. What the heck is a skills assessment? Well, at the end of this interview, you are communicating to the candidate, hey, in the next 2 hours, I'm going to be sending you through a skills assessment. And basically, it's going to walk them through, it takes about like anywhere from 30 minutes to an hour to complete. But basically, we just want to ask some very job site specific questions and give them some scenarios. And we want to see how they prioritize their actions, their time, their writing ability as well. And we just want to see how they, on paper, think through problems. Right? If we see like a 1-sentence response to everything, and we clearly told them like we want like at least 3 to 6 sentences and explain why you think about the problem the way that you do, well, then they're probably not going to be a very good fit because they're not adhering to what the instructions that you just gave them. Another thing that happens at this point, guys, which I actually love when this happens, is people just don't return the assessment, and they're like, oh, see you later, and they turn into ghosts. Okay, here's my ghost. Okay, and then our GCs would get upset and they're like, "Oh man, like this sucks. Like this is so hard." But this is the sweet spot for me, guys, because I love when people drop off here, because everybody who drops off here was just going to drop off after we onboarded them. And what we just did was we prevented them from dropping off later on by giving them an assignment that otherwise added friction to the whole process, which is a good thing. Okay, so this skills assessment, we have them complete it. We instruct them to send it back to us within a 48-hour period. And then after they send it back to us, guess what? That is when the founder, the hiring manager, whoever it is, whoever it is for your organization, you know, for my guys, my guys are all builders who do more than $2 million a year in top line revenue. Usually it is them. It is the founder of the company who is doing this all, right? So field interview and assessment review. once you've received all the skills assessments, you're going to print them out. You're physically going to print them out. You're going to invite the candidate to the job site and you're going to say, hey, this is how the interview is going to go. First off, thanks for sending through this skills assessment to me. It gave me a really strong understanding of like kind of how you think through some of these problems, right? I want to go over that with you today. And then what I also want to do is walk you through this job site and show you some of the problems that we recently faced. And talk through some of those things with you. Does that sound good? And they're like, yeah, sure. Okay. Why do we do this in person? Couple reasons. Number one, because if they chat GPT'd their assessment and they just had like the most perfect responses, and trust me, guys, I have seen this happen time and time again with some smart project managers. Where they just rely so heavily on AI. And don't get me wrong, like I respect people who rely on AI because you cared enough to at least do that. But if you have no idea what the heck you're doing, then it's going to become very clear for a couple of reasons. You're going to ask how they came to the conclusion about the responses that they gave in that assessment, and also you want to see how they are responding to the answers, how they're explaining through their answers. How confidently are they explaining their answers? Are they rambling on and on and on and on, and they just continue to keep going and going without giving you really an opportunity to get a word in? If that's the case, then they probably don't know what the heck they're doing, and they're probably BSing you. And the more questions that you ask, the more that you pry, the higher the likelihood is that you'll actually be able to see how good of a candidate this person actually is for the role that you're hiring for. The other thing that I want to note here is body language. You can see a lot about a person from their body language, how they're standing, their demeanor, and so on and so forth. And I'm not talking about people who are nervous. There's nothing wrong with being nervous. I've actually had people tell me during the interview process, like, hey, I just want you to know I am a bit nervous. Like, I really do want this job, and so on and so forth. And that does not mean to me that like they're going to be terrible. The people who have a shady kind of feel and you just kind of trust it in your gut that like, hey, you know what? I asked all these questions, but something is still not sitting right with me. I hate to say it, but it's probably for a reason. I have no idea what that reason is, but I can say that I have completely understood everything about, human intelligence and rationale, because I don't even know like 0.001% of everything in the world and how people think and work. But one thing that I do know is that when you do get that gut feeling, just trust your gut in those instances and make the decision from there. Now, let's just say that your gut is totally fine and doesn't have any leaks or issues. Then you would move on to what we call the final interview. And guys, the final interview is pretty simple. This is all about logistics. This is all about culture fit too, and just really figuring out how it is that this person can be a fit for your organization and also a growth fit for your organization. Meaning, like, can this person grow within the organization? If they can grow, then we need to figure out if their life's vision and their life's mission can fit under the umbrella of your company's vision, right? Like, so if they say that they want to be a general contractor in the next 2 years, you got to decide for yourself if that is aligned with your vision for the company. And maybe you want to bring on people who you can develop so that they can get the skill sets and serve you for a short period of time. Or maybe you want somebody with you for a longer term. If you want somebody for a longer term, then that's probably not going to fly with you. But if they say, hey, I would love to, move up into a senior project management role, or I don't know, I would like to be director of field operations later on down the line and manage the PMs who manage all of the crews that we have all across the city, the state, and so on and so forth. Or I want to be responsible for focusing on another, or building out another division for the company, like a new construction division or a development division or whatever the case is, then great, that's fine, only if that aligns with your expectations and your overall vision. Okay, so you're going to have all of these conversations here. And that's pretty much that when it comes to the final interview. I'm probably missing some things, but that's just the general gist of it. And guys, the thing is too, I should probably note, this is a high level overview of all of the steps, right? There's a lot of things that, you gotta have like in-depth training on and details. And I am going to do my best to make videos related to all these things separately and going in a lot more detail. But I just kind of want you guys to get the gist of this, because pretty immediately, if you guys start doing these things, at some level, it's going to be better than doing it at no level at all. Okay, so after the final interview, you're going to move on to candidate consideration. And then what we put here is tiebreaker doc. Tiebreaker doc is just basically a document that evaluates the top 3 candidates that you interviewed throughout your process. Sometimes it's less, depending on how many people were in your candidate pool, like I mentioned. But then you're going to want to throw every single conversation that you've had with this person into like a transcription software. And like I mentioned on the screening call, that this is going to be recorded. Well, you're going to want to record this one too, and you're going to want to record this one too, and this one too. And if it's in person, guys, then you're going to want to wear a microphone just like this one over here to document all of that stuff for you. Okay. Why? Well, because you can't expect yourself to remember every little thing about this person. And so this is where I like to recommend you use AI to some degree. And if you put together, a ChatGPT or a Claude document or something like that, that shows, kind of like your criteria for what you're looking for in the candidate, and then evaluate them based on the job description that you feed it, and say, hey, this is the job description. This is, all the things that I'm looking for in the candidate. These are some of the non-tangibles, some of the things that I picked up, and blah, blah, blah. But throw away my biases. I want you to just evaluate the conversations and see how it is as objectively as possible. If you can rank it, on scores from 1 to 10 based on all the competency, skill sets, requirements, and so on and so forth, how this person falls in line. And you leverage AI, guys. Like, use AI, use the chat GPTs or whatever the softwares are in order to assist you with making that decision. Okay. You do not want to use AI so that it makes the decision for you. You just want as much context when it comes to making that decision. And so this is one of my favorite things in the world. Leverage it so that you can make the best decision. And then finally, guys, once it does come down to it, extend the offer, do all of your negotiations. And I want to be like really clear here. Don't be that terrible leader, boss that just wants to like screw people when it comes to compensation. If they're really as good as, this process signals that they are, then feel willing to pay them, because the return that you're going to get back on originally your time and the return that it will bring you for fulfilling the constraint of your business is going to be pretty significant. So don't cheap out. Don't cheap out. And then if you're wondering like, oh crap, well, like, am I going to be able to afford this person and blah, 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 and this and that? Well, then maybe you got to evaluate different parts of your business if you can't afford top talent. And that is probably something related to financials and profitability per job. And that has more to do with how you're marketing yourself, how you're selling, and how you're conveying value to your prospects so that you can charge higher prices for every remodel project or custom home that you are selling. Okay, and that's a whole other training. That's a whole other video. But I just wanted to point that out, because you should feel really, really strongly. I at least suggest all my GCs to feel really good about paying top dollar and paying more than other people are willing to pay, if they are able to demonstrate that they are a good candidate based on all these things. And then the last thing is you welcome that person as a new hire. And it's like, congrats, like, awesome, dude, you made it. Welcome to the team. And so I did mention that I wanted to go over some of the retention principles too in this video. And so what I'll tell you guys about retention is that everything that was on the front end, everything that you had communicated to the prospect on the front end of what they can expect from working here, that's really the main thing, guys. Like, you just want to make sure that you give your employees more than they feel like they are giving to your organization. Okay, now I know how that's going to be misconstrued, but what I'm trying to say is that when you sell somebody a remodel, right, and you charge a lot of money for it, you want to over deliver on everything that you promised them on. And that's kind of the same thing when it comes to employer-employee relationships, is you want to give so much to that employee to where they almost feel indebted to you, where they almost feel like, I want to do the best job ever, not because I'm terrified of my leader, but because I don't want to disappoint them because of how much they have poured into me. That is my general philosophy when it comes to retention, whether it's client retention, customer retention, client referrals, and mainly in this case, employee retention. If you want to keep people that are good for a long period of time, then you need to be willing to invest into their skill set, into their mindset, and into whatever it is that they choose to pursue within their lives. You cannot be, oh, you can be, but I do not recommend that you be the type of leader that holds people back. And so that is everything with all my annotations and fun drawings. I hope that you guys enjoyed this. If you like this video, then, feel free to subscribe. And yeah, if you run a remodeling company, a design build company, and or a custom home building company, you can book a call with me, and I'm happy to help you out with processes just like this. Or don't, and that's okay with